Yo, what's going on, guys? It's your boy. Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about the movie Materialist. This is an A24 rom-com that's currently out, starring Dakota Johnson, Pedro Pascal, and Chris Evans. Let's talk about it, shall we?
Modern Movie Review.
I'm going to go ahead and say this. I personally really strongly dislike the way that this movie is in comparison to the marketing for this movie. I feel like this movie had a relatively interesting premise, and there's a lot to enjoy about this movie. And honestly, there's a whole lot to unpack about this movie, so I am probably going to accidentally ramble on for a really long time during this review. But the one thing I will say, whoever marketed this movie, you could tell they did not have confidence in the actual movie they were releasing for this to sell. So they sold it on the fact that, hey, there's this one hot character. Hey, there's this one hot character. Love triangle, question mark? Maybe it's going to be a love triangle. And then also, some of the advertisements have also really played into the fact that it is a rom-com. And if you look at the genre on, I believe, IMDb and on Letterboxd, it does say that it's a romantic comedy. And I think that that is painfully just incorrect. And I also feel like, for the most part, that advertising is very tone-deaf, considering, spoiler alert for anybody who has not seen the movie, one of the main subplots in this film is about a character getting sexually assaulted. So let's dive into this full review, shall we? Okay, so to deal with the mess that is this movie, I want to talk about the things that I actually really liked about this movie and the things that I thought were actually relatively interesting and could have built a really great movie had they decided to focus on it. For one, there is a subplot that I had previously just mentioned about a character getting sexually assaulted. And for people who do not know, Dakota Johnson's character is somebody who is a matchmaker in New York City. Her goal is to kind of like get, successful men, people that are, very desirable, and trying to find them in partners in the big city. And they're basically like, imagine like Tinder or Hinge, but like to the highest degree possible, the most like prestigious version of it, and supposedly super duper successful, right? That's what Dakota Johnson is. She helps these people who are very high-end rich people find love and find romantic partners, and they'll go on dates. And constantly throughout this movie, she is, taking phone calls, and she's like constantly trying to be like, hey, Jim, you should, potentially try to meet this other client, and this client is probably going to really like you. And then she's answering phone calls and being like, hey, how did your date go? And then, being like, oh, that's awesome. The person you went on a date with, they also had a good time. Isn't that fantastic? And that's what her job is, right? And so for this movie, that's, a very big part of her life is that she views relationships very different from people who do not have that job, because the way she views relationships are these people compatible? Let's look at the numbers. Let's see the boxes that they check off, and does this person's boxes match this person's boxes? And they both have a set of wants that is honestly unrealistic, and considering the fact that like this person, only has this thing and that trait and this trait and that trait, they're not desirable to somebody who has all the boxes that they're looking for. So she needs to kind of pick and choose which boxes she thinks, this person is worthy of and this person is worthy of, and sending two random people on a date and just kind of hoping for the best. And this job to me just feels insanely fictional. And the way that Dakota Johnson talks about people in the first half of this movie is as if they're just numbers and they don't actually exist and nothing is that serious. And it is really weird because there's a lot of moments throughout this film where she talks about how like, it's just dating and you're just, trying to look at the numbers and hope that you can just kind of get the right pairing. And one of the interesting plots that I really thought was captivating is she has a client, I can't remember the name right now, I believe it's Sophie, who has now gone on 9 failed dates and is really starting to feel worthless and is now starting to feel like this program just isn't meant for her and that, she's never going to find love. And then eventually Dakota Johnson pairs her up with this guy. I believe the name was Mark. It doesn't really matter. And they go on a date, and all of a sudden Sophie is not answering any of Dakota Johnson's calls. And Mark said that they had a really good time and that he kind of would love to see her again. And then we realize and we discover Sophie got sexually assaulted at that date. And it instantly twists this entire movie that for the most part was going relatively smoothly. It almost felt like a rom-com, almost, not quite, because the comedy never really was there. But it turns this movie that seems like a relatively simple, basic rom-com into something way more serious really quickly, as instantly Dakota Johnson realizes, oh my god, what the fuck did I do? And her life completely starts crumbling because, oh my god, I just set this girl up with a guy who sexually assaulted her. This is my fault. And that is something that I thought was really great about this movie, is Dakota Johnson is a character who has a really bad guilt complex, and she has this like massive self-hatred, and she's constantly trying to push people away, and she doesn't really believe in love because like she herself hates herself so much that she doesn't have a capacity for love, right? we discovered throughout flashbacks throughout this movie that her and Chris Evans' character had dated for about 5 years and that they ended up breaking up because he was broke. And she actually said that she doesn't want to hate him because he's broke, but she hates him because he is broke, and she hates herself because of that. And because she hates herself so much, she's assuming that he hates her and that she couldn't imagine anybody ever loving her because of how shallow and just materialistic she is, which is the name of the movie, which is part of the reason why I was like, this movie could have been really good. This movie really had a lot of potential here. I'm really upset about the way that they kind of like structured this film, and especially with the way that they marketed this film, because a lot of people were expecting a weird little love triangle, and that's almost not how the movie works at all. In fact, at no point does Chris Evans really feel that threatened by Pedro Pascal's character, and at no point does Pedro Pascal's character ever feel even slightly threatened about Chris Evans' character. Like, there really is no like them fighting over her at all in this entire movie. But that being said, throughout this film, Dakota Johnson is trying to like learn more and more about herself, and she's, starts off this film very cold and very distant and thinks that like dating is just numbers and it's not that serious of a thing, until she has a conversation with Chris Evans' character, and he kind of says that exact same thing, because she tells him about, what's going on and how like she's having a really hard time with work, and he says, at the end of the day, it's just dating, it's not that serious. And she gets really upset because, oh my god, of course my ex thinks that dating isn't serious. And it creates all this different turmoil, and the majority of the like conflict in this movie is like miscommunication tropes, which, not to be that guy, is one of the worst tropes in an actual traditional rom-com. And so in this film, it also does not work for me. Pedro Pascal does not get much character in this film at all. In fact, so like I wanted to bring that up because I haven't really mentioned Pedro Pascal at all. He's just kind of hot and there, and he's somebody who Dakota Johnson is like, oh my god, he would be a great client that I could potentially matchmake some of these women with, because he's hot, he's rich, he, for the most part, seems to be a really good person, he's tall, this is all the things that women want. And so she's trying to get him as a client, but he's like, hey, if you go on a date with me, I'll consider it. Hey, if you, come back to my place, I'll consider it. And they have, a couple steamy nights together, are together for a couple of weeks, and they talk about love like it's more of a business partnership. And instead of like, oh, we're getting married because we love each other, we're getting married because it'll benefit both of us. And it is a very negative and toxic representation of what love is. And the majority of this movie is Dakota Johnson just kind of treating love like that. Like, it's just kind of a business thing. Like, people don't actually get married to actually like love each other forever. They get married because they think that, it'll work out and that for the time being it'll make them happy. And most people only get married because they're pressured into it. And I think that it sets a very terrible message, and for the most part, that's how she feels. And you discover part of it is because her parents ended up getting a divorce, and so she's bitter against love in general because her parents got a divorce and that she comes from a broken family. So there's some interesting stuff there, but it's also really weird because like she's experiencing love in real life. Chris Evans' character has loved her unapologetically this entire time. He's constantly doing romantic gestures for her. He's going above and beyond for her constantly. And she's too shallow to really accept that love. And then at the end of the movie, they just kind of get together and they have this like really, what should have been a very heartfelt moment, kind of like confessing their love for one another. And Dakota Johnson has zero chemistry with him. And it does really kill the moment. It is absolutely terrible because she's just like, you know what? I love you too. And then they both just awkwardly stand there. And that was a lot of my problems with this movie as well. This movie's runtime is about an hour and 49 minutes. I feel like if you take out the really long awkward pauses in between some people having conversations, this movie could potentially be an hour and 30 minutes, because there are some sequences where like Dakota Johnson and Pedro Pascal are having a conversation, and then they'll just sit on Pedro Pascal for like 10 seconds after Dakota Johnson said something, and there's no other words of dialogue in this scene. They just held the camera on him for no reason, and they do that a lot. So the pacing of this movie is a little weird. I think that the chemistry for all of these actors and actresses don't really work. I think if you're going to do a love triangle type thing in a movie, you got to make sure that if it's two guys and one girl, the girl has to be insanely charismatic. If it's two girls and one guy, the guy has to be insanely charismatic. And I think that Dakota Johnson just doesn't necessarily match that charismatic vibe. And it kind of works at the first half because she's supposed to be cold and distant and she doesn't necessarily need to actually feel like she's in love with them. But at no point does there feel like there's any actual romance in this movie. And I do think that that is a massive gripe that I will have with this film. And overall, I think that one other redeeming quality, though, that this film does have that I do really like, the comedy in this movie, not what I would expect from this movie because like rom-coms you typically come to expect like, you know, the guy making an ass out of himself or like different kind of silly things like that. The only times there's really comedy in this movie is they'll quickly do montages of Dakota Johnson doing her job, and she'll be talking to women, and women will be like, "Oh my God, I'm looking for a guy that's 6'4", and I want him to be like absolutely jacked, and he needs to make at least 200K." And then like the girl will be making like the most ridiculous claims, and then Dakota Johnson's like, "I'll try to figure it out." And then you go to the guys, and they'll be like, "Oh, well, I want this, that, this, and that," and it's once again the most unrealistic claims. And I think that it was actually a really good like meta commentary on like people in general just wanting too much out of a relationship. When it comes to love, you really need to like set a standard that's obviously somebody can surpass, but should be realistic. And I think that there's a lot of unrealistic dating standards nowadays, and especially on dating apps, which I think they're kind of trying to make fun of with this movie. There's a lot of times people on dating apps will be like, "Oh, well, you know, you can pick and choose whoever you're going on dates with. Why would I settle for somebody that's not checking all of my boxes?" So there's some sequences where it's like a guy and he's like, "Oh, I'm 58 years old and I really want to date a girl that's mature, and I want somebody who's fit, and I want them to be hot, and I want them to, you know, have a good job and this and that." And then Dakota Johnson will be like, "Oh, you know what? I have this really good candidate for you. She's 34." And then the guy's just like, "Yeah, I said mature. I was thinking more like 27." And she's just like, "Oh yeah, no worries. I have this girl at 31." And he's just like, "Yeah, 30s is really pushing it." And like there's like little jokes like that that are absolutely hilarious. So I did laugh out loud multiple times in this movie. The one time I laughed out loud the most, actually, and this is probably really bad. So Chris Evans' character is an actor, and at one point him and Dakota Johnson's character were both acting together, and Chris Evans asks, "Hey, do you ever miss it?" And she mentions that she's just not a great actress, and the way that Dakota Johnson delivered that line almost felt like a meta commentary, like she knows that people don't think she's a good actress. And I actually laughed out loud, and nobody else in the theater thought that was funny, but I thought that was hilarious. I thought that was really funny. But yeah, that being said, overall I had a decent time with this movie. I think that the marketing for it wasn't great. I think that there could have been a lot better chemistry, but there is some deep messages here, and I think that obviously there's also some bad messages here about like, oh well, love should just be like a business transaction. And also Pedro Pascal, his character was originally really short, and he paid $200,000 to get some surgery to be taller. And I think that that's kind of selling the wrong message to some guys who might watch this movie, who are like, "Oh, if you want to be loved and admired, you just have to change everything about yourself." It is 2025. We really need to stop selling that message to people. But yeah, so overall, if I had to give this movie a rating on a scale of 1 to 100, I'm giving this movie a solid 79. I would have enjoyed it more had I expected some of the deeper and darker tones going into this film. But that being said, they just kind of like shocked me out of nowhere when I watched this film. And for the most part, I liked it. I just think that it's not what I was expecting. And if I was expecting it, maybe it'd be closer to like an 84, 85, but I couldn't get fully on board with this movie. But yeah, that being said, that's it for this video. Thank you guys so much for coming by checking it out. I love and appreciate you guys so much for watching. And if you liked it, feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll hopefully see you guys in the next one. Peace out. Bow, bow, bow.